Okay, verse 15 is the year 200 BC. And I'm going to just quickly summarise verse 15. I'm not actually going to go through the wording of it. Verse 15 is tied up with verse 14. We saw that verse 14 was in the year 201 to 200 BC. And verse 15 is just a continuation of that history of the king of the north regaining Judah, basically. And it deals with the war that's going on and how he goes about capturing Palestine. And it details the history of that event, and you can identify that history with the war. There was a battle that actually went on, and we know who the general was that was fighting for the king of the south. There's a lot of historical information on that. But verse 15 is dealing with the history that surrounds this warfare. 4 minutes. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry? Okay, I'm going to leave the Q&A at the moment. If there's not any questions of what I've spoken about.
And so the regaining of Judah by the king of the north, wasn't it opposed by Rome?
At this stage it isn't.
Okay.
After the verse 15 it isn't.
So, but you said, so Rome began to oppose itself, to enter into the international scene in verse 13, right. But it's still not powerful enough to actually make any difference until verse 16, perhaps next.
Okay. We've got the point that I want to make. We're in verse 16 now. We're in verse 16.
Hold on.
So we just did verse 15. We just summarise 15 very quickly. It's dealing with the battle that occurs in the year 200 BC, and it's a continuation of verse 14. It just explains the battle that actually goes on, and the king of the north takes captive takes captive Palestine. It actually brings Palestine under its jurisdiction in 200 BC. Correct? 200. Oh, verse 15, year 200. We're in verse 16 now. And we're going to split verse 16 into 3 sections, part A, part B, part C. Let's take part A. So we're dealing with 16A, and we're dealing in the year 200 to 197. It's the 5th Syrian War, and the kings are the same kings that are in verse before him. Actually, we're just going to split it into 2 sections, 16A and 16B. Now we see a transfer of kingship. If you remember, we had the king of the north, the king of the south. Okay, we said that the king of the north is in 2 parts, Syria and Greece. Remember that? And this was Egypt. So we see now the beginning of the destruction of this part of the empire. Greece and Macedonia are the same part. So this is the first part of where the king of the north begins to get destroyed. In verse 16a. So it says, he, pagan Rome, cometh against him, Greece shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. Which is again talking about Rome. We've already discussed that in 200 BC, Rome declares war against Macedonia. We've already discussed that Antiochus wins back Palestine, but he's held back from taking Egypt. Now in 197, this war where Rome attacks Macedonia, by the time you get to the year 197, Rome defeats Macedonia. And so the king Greece is now taken off the scene because it's now taken over by Rome. And then by 195 BC, there's peace in the land once again. Greece is taken off the scene, and Egypt and Syria stop warring one with another. So that's the history that we've got to so far, that we've come to the dismantling of the first part of the King of the North. Okay, so Rome has now risen to the ascendancy, and it's taken Greece out of the picture. And when we get to the latter part of verse 16, we're going to see that Rome now begins to take over the title of King of the North. Okay, so I'm just going to summarise that, and tomorrow we'll pick up this point now. In verse 16, okay, we've already seen the start of it, but the point will be developed in the latter part of the verse, that the title of the King of the North gets transferred from this entity here, which was Greece/Syria, to pagan Rome. Okay, so verse 16 is a critical verse for us to really understand. And a lot of history occurs in verse 16. So we need to go through it a bit slowly and a bit carefully. We're going to pick up that verse 16. So you get an idea of where we're going to be heading. Once we get through verse 16, the second part of 16 here, and then we go into verse 17, 18 and 19. Those verses, there's not a lot of information on them, so we'll skip through them very quickly. And when we get into verses right up to verse 30, we should be able to go through those verses quite quickly. There's not a lot of historical information in those verses, but there are some points we want to bring up. And once we do that, we'll get to verse 30, which is a very interesting verse. Before I close, which I'm just about to do now, I just want to point out one thing. Do you remember when I said at the beginning, when we structure the verses, you can either structure them chronologically or in themes? Remember that? In verse 16, we've picked up the history of Rome. Rome's history starts in verse 16 and it ends in verse 30, if you remember. We're going to find that the history of Rome is split into two. Okay? We're going to go from verse 16 to verse 22. And then we're going to go from verse 23 to verse 30. And what we'll find is that these verses are covering the same history, but they're looking at it from two different perspectives. So we're going to go to the beginning of the history of Rome, to the end of the history of Rome. Then we're going to go back to the beginning of the history of Rome and go to the end. We're going to go from the beginning to the end twice over when we deal with the history of Rome. 16 to 22, then back again to the beginning, 23 to 30. And we're going to look at the themes of that. So we just need to run through that carefully. But the historical events in some of these verses we'll get through quickly. But I just want to point that out, that that's where we need to get to grips with.
So the transfer from Greece, Syria to Rome is 16b. So you wrote verse 16b.
Okay, I've just got 16, just as the whole thing. Okay, it starts happening in 16a, but it progresses. Okay? So, we've got 15 minutes to clear the room. Are there any short questions?
I know Rome appears on the sea, so in verse 16. Rome came in the region of Italy, right? So when Rome was rising up, was that like a new government, a new system of things? Because was that where all the emperors started off with, or all the Caesars started off? I'm just trying to have an idea in my mind how Rome actually started.
I think like most countries, the starting up of a nation is either clouded in history or takes a long time. So we haven't got to the time of the Caesars yet and the emperors. We're just talking about perhaps a number of tribes who have banded together and they're starting to form a nation. Very similar to the starting up of the United States perhaps. So I'm not sure really how to respond to your question. They're a separate nation and they're becoming a strong nation and they're entering into the scene of history. But I don't think that actually answered your question. So,
no, but in a way you did, because you said it's gradual.
Okay.
The emperors and the Caesars coming in.
Yeah, the Caesars haven't come yet, but we'll pick them up in the Latin verses very quickly. Let's close with prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your continued goodness and mercy. As we spend this evening in our own homes or fellowship with brethren, may we not lose the blessing of these sacred hours. May we come before you and open your word and meditate upon the things that we have studied. May our conversations be uplifted and high and holy. Lord, we know that the Sabbath is going to be closed in a few moments. May we take a moment here and pause, that we would reverence and mark this moment as your Sabbath hours close. May we continue to keep this thought in our minds as we're travelling back home and we enter into a new week. May we have travelling mercies, Lord, both going home and coming back tomorrow, so that we might be refreshed to open your word tomorrow and continue to see the blessed glories that you have written there for us to understand. Bless us now, we ask and pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.